Ghost lights are seen all over the world and recur in some locations for decades. Some are self-combusting gases, others are bioluminescent insects, while piezoelectric and plasma phenomena may be the cause of many. Then there are those which are more mysterious, seeming to act with an intelligence, which in the past were often explained as roaming spirits, but today are more commonly posited as UFOs. The most famous ghost light in Australia lurks in the Channel Country of far western Queensland, named the Min Min light. The term is so well known it has become the name for ghost lights in Australia, just as Will-o'-the-Wisp or Jack-o'-lantern is in other regions. Today Min Min has a population, according to the 2016 census, of exactly 0. There never was much of a population. The Min Min Hotel stood on the side of the Boulia to Winton Road, on a sliver of land set aside as a government water tank reserve, between Warrenda and Lucknow cattle stations. One of a number of hotels built to facilitate the Cobb & Co coach line, it was described as slab-built, consisting of several rooms with a bar and a dining area. The menu is said to have included an Irish stew consisting of goat chops stewed in rice, and sun-dried corned beef. Min Min was built in 1886. The first licensee was a man named William Lilly, who remained until about 1912. In 1914, Agnes Hasted took over the licence. She had married George Hasted in 1887, and they had 12 children, the youngest, Sarah, born in 1910. Some time before she took on the hotel, the couple separated. Her youngest son, Horace, died in 1912 at the age of 4, and another son, Ernest, had been so badly bitten by bull ants in 1898 near Winton that he died as a result at the age of 7. It is not known which of the children lived at the Min Min, although many of them may have. Lionel is known to have done so. Another son, George, who later ran the Hotel Hamilton, further along the Boulia Road, which today is in ruins, was married at the hotel in 1918. Eventually in 1953, when Agnes passed away at the age of 85, she was buried next to the Hamilton Hotel. Out the back of the Min Min Hotel was also a small graveyard, which was the probable genesis of later stories which circulated about the hotel. It was claimed that drinks were doped and travellers robbed and sometimes killed and buried in secret, while others died in drunken brawls or drank themselves to death, and likewise were dragged out and dumped in the handy burial ground. There is no evidence to support these lurid accounts, however. While most of the graves are unmarked, it can be assumed who might be there. James Collins, described as a labourer, was found dead by the side of the road 4 miles from the hotel on the 27th of December 1888. It was believed he had died of thirst. As temperatures here in summer can hover between 115 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit, such a tragedy is not surprising. In 1917, a bushfire was being fought on Warrenda Station. 4 men who had been out battling the flames in a thunderstorm suddenly found themselves caught in a fresh flare-up when 2 lightning strikes hit near them. Caught in the new fires, they perished. James Springthorpe, one of the 4, was the brother of Agnes Hasted, and as she was his only relative in Australia, it is possible he was buried behind the Min Min, although the newspaper accounts state all 4 were buried at Boulia Cemetery. The Min Min Hotel was totally destroyed by a fire on the 11th of February 1924. 3 men had been camped by the hotel on September the 30th, 1923, when one of them in a drunken state settled an argument by setting fire to a wagonette of another. That man, John Carney, was safely locked away by the time the Min Min burned down, however. A blog entry on the Min Min Hotel claims a lightning strike was the cause, but links it to a storm which swept through the area some days after the hotel was destroyed. Regardless, Cobb & Co coaches had ceased operations in 1922, so the hotel was never rebuilt. Just piles of broken glass and the neglected graveyard marked its site. And, of course, the ghost light. Sightings of the ghostly light are said to have been made by indigenous people before the coming of European settlement. In 1910, the oldest Aboriginal man in the area said he had seen it as a young boy. To his people it was known as kurari, meaning simply light. They believed the light came from an old burial ground of their ancestors north of Polygammon, near Dinner Creek. The first sightings by settlers are said to have been in the 1880s, contemporaneous to the building of the hotel. The light is said to be the size of a car's headlight and bobs about between 3 and 10 feet from the ground. It is said to move at speeds up to 40 miles per hour. A man in his 70s who had worked on Warrender Station between 1890 and 1894 wrote to the Northern Miner newspaper in April 1944 to say the Min Min light was hooey and he had never heard of it at that time. He, like the other station hands, had spent a great amount of time at the pub. The earliest newspaper accounts seem to date from 1926. A person using the initials HJL wrote to the Saturday Journal, an Adelaide newspaper. The letter, published on the 20th of March 1926, mentions that during the drought of 1902, extraordinary lights were seen by many people around Winton, and again during a drought in 1914, the light appeared on the Boulia to Winton Road, sometimes bright and sometimes dim. Kangaroo shooters shot at the light without effect, and groups of men tried to trace them without success. The Longreach Leader, dated 20th of August of that year, has a story which refers to the Min Min light in a way which suggests the readers would have been instantly familiar with it. Rowley Wall and Dick Neal were driving some passengers from the Warrender Station when they saw the light, which was standing still for a moment, and then commenced dancing about in an awe-inspiring manner. The newspaper stated that the light was always seen close to an old grave, and had been glimpsed on numerous occasions for 40 years. One witness had chased after the light, it was said, but eventually rode his horse into a fence and broke his leg in the attempt. An earlier brush with the light had happened in 1912. The story was told in a journal in 1937 and reprinted as a newspaper account in 1949. Henry Lamond, then manager of Warrender Station, was riding on his horse Nellie to Slasher's Creek, some 27 miles from the station, in July of that year to oversee the lamb marking. It was about 2 a.m. on a freezing cold night when he saw a glowing green light floating ahead in the direction of Winton. Although there were only 2 or 3 cars in the area then, he had seen enough of them to know the light did not resemble a headlight. Nellie had not displayed any signs of fear, and she was scared of cars. The light kept approaching and got so close that its glow cast enough illumination that he could plainly see a beetle crawling on his arm. Then it abruptly extinguished. Nellie never once was perturbed. To test her later, he struck a match and she reacted at once to that small light. An early story of an encounter with the light, although not published until 1941, says that a rider was passing by Min Min soon after the hotel had been destroyed. Right in the centre of the little graveyard was a glowing light the size of a watermelon. Spooked, he spurred his horse to a gallop, but when he glanced over his shoulder, saw the light following him. Almost all the way into the township of Boulia it followed. In quick succession 2 more sightings occurred. A man and his wife riding through the area, and unaware of the Min Min light, saw the orb intensify in brilliance and move away from them. Curious, they followed but could not catch up to the light. Yielding the chase, they continued on their way, to discover that now the light was trailing them. A few nights later, a lone rider saw the light rise up from the graveyard and bounce around the darkness like a football being kicked from player to player. In 1928, an explanation for the origin of the light, referred to then as the Warrender light, was given tongue-in-cheek by an old-timer. In the early 1880s, he arrived in Boulia when it was just a wayside shanty, and met up with a drover from New South Wales. He took part in moving the herd and had a decent cheque when he met up with a mate called Long Mick. With the cash they decided to purchase 2 horses and supplies of food and 6 bottles of rum. The men were leading their horses when Mick's horse got spooked and ran off across the shadowy plain. They were aghast, as the rum was on the horse which had bolted. Tying the other horse to a tree, they set off in pursuit, but by the time they found the horse 6 miles away, it had bucked the supplies off somewhere. Mick, who had spent weeks drinking his last cheque away, was starting to get the trembles, and vowed, "I'll find them bottles if I have to search till doomsday." Mick made a fire in a bundle of sticks and ran off, swirling the torch to make it flare up as he ran off. The narrator begged his mate to come back, but Mick screamed, "No, no! I'll find them if I have to search for ever and ever. I swear by the ghost of my father I'll find them if I have to search through eternity." The next day the storyteller went to Warrender Station and enlisted the help of some stockmen to help find his mate. 3 days after, they found Long Mick dead in a gully, still clutching his fire stick. They buried him out there, and according to the yarn, the light is Mick's ghost, forever searching for the lost bottles of rum. Another origin tale says 2 men held a horse race by the pub, which resulted in one falling from his horse and breaking his neck. Presumably the light is that unlucky man's spirit. An article in the Longreach Leader in March 1928 reported that a person in a car was found creating the light on a few nights. The supposed individual went unnamed, and the lights continued to be seen. Discussion of the light brought forth old stories. In December 1928, a correspondent called Trooper related he had seen the light on 2 occasions, saying it looked like an acetylene light, and he thought someone was playing a trick on him. When he mentioned his sightings in Boulia, several people told him they had seen the same thing. An old swagman who had camped at Polygammon Creek had heard the stories but dismissed them, until he saw a ball of fire coming towards him from the direction of where the hotel had formerly stood. He quickly gathered his things and ran away. A man named J.T. Wern was with a droving party in 1929, camped near the Min Min site. Around midnight he had just come on watch for 2 hours, when he and the man he was replacing saw a bright light, which they took for a car's headlight, 1.5 to 2 miles away, which never came any closer though they waited. Suddenly it vanished, and so the other man went off to sleep. A while later it blinked back on, but in the opposite direction, yet still appearing 1.5 miles away, now with a slightly reddish glow. It stayed still in the same spot for an hour, despite the wintry June wind which was blowing over the treeless plain. Again it suddenly disappeared as if switched off. At breakfast the next day, a drover who lived in those parts nodded and related the story of the Min Min light. 2 poems were published about the Min Min light. The Light of Min Min by D.B. O'Connor in December 1934, and another called Back of Boulia by Jack Sketch in April 1935, which would have helped to solidify the legend of the Min Min light in popular culture. In 1937, a rider was passing the old pub site when he was chased by the light 9 miles. At one point in the pursuit he hurled his swag at it. The light stopped, circled the pack 3 times, then continued to follow the horseman for some distance. Although sightings are centred on Min Min, the light was seen one time a couple of miles from the Middleton pub on the Winton Road. A man left his son in charge of the wagons while he walked to the pub. Returning at midnight, he couldn't see his son and called out. From underneath a tarpaulin his son responded, "Here I am, Dad." When asked what was wrong, the lad replied, "I've seen the light, Dad. It raced over the wagons. Bluey's gone too, broke his chain and went bush." On the 10th of February 1951, 3 men were camped 2 miles west of the old hotel and saw a strange light in the sky at about 8:30 p.m. Unlike most reports of the Min Min, this light was high enough in the sky to dart in and out of a cloud, estimated to be 15 miles away. In about 10 seconds it moved an estimated 30 miles. Perhaps this was something different. Traditional reports continued to be made. One of the most reliable was from the 2nd of May 1981. Detective Sergeant Lyle Booth of the Stock Squad was camped near Bullabulla Waterhole, between Boulia and Winton. Booth awoke about 11 p.m. and saw a light floating over the Hamilton River channels, which, although it appeared to be moving, also did not appear to be getting any closer. After watching it for half an hour, he went back to sleep, and waking again about 1 a.m. saw it was still about, more to the north now, not as bright and with a slight yellow colour. It illuminated the ground nearby as he observed it for 5 or 6 minutes. Then it suddenly dived at the ground and went out. A search in daylight hours revealed no clue to the strange manifestation. Sightings continue to this day. In 2016, the father of a family camping in the area awoke late at night and looked at what he thought was the moon. Then he looked around and saw a second moon. Then the first moon vanished. The Min Min has been embraced as a source of tourism in the area, and as a puzzling reminder that not everything has been explained and stripped of its romance. Signs have been erected by the local council alerting visitors to the Min Min light phenomenon, inviting them, while camped on the dark open plains, to glance into the dark corners of history.